Part 92. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 912. Princess, Princess, what's wrong with you? Mayer saw Princess Anyang standing there blankly, stretching out her little hand and shaking it in front of her eyes. Mobile Terminal M. Thinking of some possibility, Princess Anyang opened her hand irritably and murmured, "Impossible, impossible, what's good about him?" Zuier looked at her and asked, "Is the princess talking about Mr. Tang?" "Of course Mr. Tang will be fine." Princess Anyang looked at her and said angrily, "Tell me, why is he getting better?" Zhao hadn't noticed the change in Princess Anyang's mind, so she thought for a while and said, "First, he is handsome, who doesn't like handsome people, second, he is also very talented and has done so many things for the court. The big thing is that he became prime minister at a young age, the most important thing is that thirdly, he is very good to his wife and friends. No matter who it is, the wife and friends who bully him will not end well. King Kong crashed their boat, King Duan captured his friends, and he was not afraid of their identities as princes and princes." Princess Anyang looked at Chi'er, and a hint of enlightenment suddenly appeared in her mind. Tang Ning is already the most outstanding young talent in the Chen kingdom. Under him, the so-called heroes can't even compare to his little finger. While young people of his age were still studying hard for the imperial examinations and running around looking for opportunities, he had already become a marquis and became a prime minister, reaching as far as any scholar in the world could go. Of course, although this was an important reason why she looked at him differently, it was not the reason why she was willing to dedicate her first kiss to him. He was so kind to his wife that it was outrageous. Prince Kong just bumped into their boat in Tianashanju and was pulled down from his position as prince by Tang Ning. Zhou Jiagui was a relative of the emperor, and if he provoked Tang Shui, wouldn't he be expelled from the capital as well? King Duan captured his friends, including the Tang family and concubine Tang Hui. In addition to losing a few lives, he also gained his position as the crown prince. Tang Shui is his fiancée, and as for the girl named Duo, Princess Anyang must have some unclear relationship with him. Princess Anyang had to admit that he was protective of his women to the extreme. As a woman, who wouldn't want her husband to be an upright man who would dare to face any power for them and shield them from all wind and rain? This is the dream every woman has had since she was a girl. Even though she always looks strong in front of others, she still hopes that one day she can be like an ordinary woman and find an arm she can rely on. After Jinna reminded her, she finally realized that in the eyes of women, Tang Ning's greatest advantage was not his appearance, his talents, or his status, but no matter what kind of difficulties and obstacles he faced, he can protect his woman behind him like a real man. Princess Anyang, who has been working on his and Zhao Man's affairs, knows this better than anyone else. Princess Anyang had a dumbfounded expression on her face. Could this be the reason why she didn't reject the kiss? After a while, she regained her composure, secretly spat, and said, "So what, he's not just a greedy guy." Princess's mansion, another courtyard. The anger on Prince Fu's face had not disappeared. Princess Fu came over, took his arm, and asked with a smile, "What's the matter, Anyang made you angry again?" King Fu snorted coldly and said, "You haven't even gotten married yet, and your elbows are bent outwards." Princess Fu looked at him and said in surprise, "What is the prince talking about?" Prince Fu's face turned cold again, "And that man named Tang dared to refuse my proposal and let him recognize Anyang as his sister. It is his blessing. Does he feel aggrieved?" Princess Fu said, "How come you surname Tang recognizes Anyang as your sister? What is the prince talking about?" Prince Fu said, "Who else has the surname Tang who often comes to the princess's mansion?" "Are you talking about Tang Xiang?" Princess Fu asked with a look of surprise on her face. "Why does the prince want Tang Xiang to recognize Anyang as his sister?" King Fu looked into the sky, and the anger on his face gradually disappeared. After a long time, he revealed a trace of sadness and said, because he is the only one who can protect Anyang. Princess Fu held his arm slightly harder, her face gradually turned pale, she lowered her head and asked softly, is this really what you want? I owe this to their mother and son. Prince Fu looked at Princess Fu, a trace of apology appeared on his face, and said, I'm just sorry for you and Anyang. He paused and said, in a few days, you and Anyang should go back to the fiefdom first. When the matter in the capital is settled, I will go to the fiefdom to find you. Princess Fu shook her head and said, if the prince doesn't leave, we won't go anywhere. King Fu looked at her. A completely different aura came out of his fat body. The expression on his face became more serious than ever. He said, no matter what happens, I will not let you suffer at all. The child was hurt. After Tang Ning left the princess's mansion, she forgot about the kiss that Princess Anyang had given her so proudly. For him, Zhao Man's matter was more urgent. His plan to leave Beijing this time originally included taking Zhao Man with him, but the prerequisite was that she could leave the palace before Tang Ning could implement the plan. Now that she was banned in the palace by Emperor Chen was obviously wary of him. He wanted to see Zhao Man before leaving, but it was already impossible to think about it. If Zhao Man doesn't leave the palace, although Tang Ning can still find a way to continue the plan, the process will be much more difficult and the result will be more uncertain. He returned to the Tang mansion with a heavy heart. Tang Yaoyao stood in the yard, looking at him, and asked from a distance, where did you go? Tang Ning replied, I discussed something with the princess. Tang Yaoyao walked up, looked directly at his face, and asked, what's wrong with your face? Tang Ning destroyed the evidence before leaving the princess's mansion. At this moment, he was also very calm and said, nothing. Tang Yaoyao seemed to have thought of something. She suddenly walked up and kissed him hard on the other side of his face, and then wiped the kiss mark with her palm. Similar marks immediately appeared on both sides of Tang Ning's face. Tang Ning stared at Tang Yaoyao in a daze, and then he felt a pain in his waist. Tang Yaoyao looked at him with an angry face and asked, tell me, which vixen is this? At this moment, a charming figure ran over from a distance, kissed Tang Ning lightly on the face, and then stood beside Tang Ning, smiled brightly, and said, brother wiped it off just now, so it doesn't count. Tang Yaoyao looked at Xiao Xiao and asked in confusion, you? Xiao Xiao smiled embarrassedly and said, brother said that sister Yaoyao likes to be jealous the most. If she sees his face, if there is a lip mark on it, she will definitely get angry. I said sister Yaoyao is reasonable and will definitely ask first. Brother didn't believe it, so he made a bet with me. Tang Yaoyao pointed to the other side of Tang Ning's face and said, so, that was you just now. Xiao Xiao looked at her and said nervously, sister Yaoyao won't be angry, right? No, how could that be? Tang Yaoyao shook her head repeatedly and said guiltily, I'm not an unreasonable person. After saying that, she glared at Tang Ning with a hidden look, as if she was very dissatisfied with Tang Ning's bad words about her behind her back. Xiao Xiao is the little princess of the family, Tang Yaoyao would never think that she is a vixen, so Tang Ning successfully escaped. After she left, Xiao Xiao stuck out her tongue at Tang Ning and whispered, sister Yaoyao is the most jealous, brother should be careful in the future. Tang Ning rubbed her head and said, don't make blind guesses, you are just a kid, this is a misunderstanding. I know, Xiao Xiao nodded, and then said, no matter what, there are already 4 sisters at home, brother should not mess around outside, I can't help you next time. Watching her walk away pretending to be mature, Tang Ning shook his head helplessly. When he was about to go back to the study, he suddenly felt something and looked to the other side of the yard. The old beggar stood in the corner, holding a wooden stick as thick as a baby's arm. Crack! He looked at Tang Ning and gently applied force, breaking the wooden stick in his hand into 2 pieces. Ruyi Xiaolang Jun. Ruyi Xiaolang Jun. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 913. The old beggar threw the broken stick on the ground, looked at Tang Ning, and said, "Boy, come here, I have something to say to you." Xiao Xiao retreated back to the yard, looked at the old beggar curiously, and said, "Master, do you have anything to say to your brother?" The old beggar watched her walk to Tang Ning, habitually took his arm, sat on the ground a little decadently, and waved his hand and said, "No more, no more." Tang Ning looked down at Xiao Xiao and asked, "Why are you back again?" Xiao Xiao looked up at him and asked, "Brother, are we going to Guizhou in a few days?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "We will live there in the future, the scenery there is much better than the capital, and it will soon become prosperous. You don't have to worry about being bored there." Xiao Xiao shook her head and said, "I'm not worried about being bored, but it will be difficult to see Xiao Yu again after this trip." Tang Ning smiled and said, "It doesn't matter, you can often invite her to visit Candy." Xiao Xiao asked with some expectation, "Is it okay?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "Of course, if she is willing." "Then I'll go find her." Xiao Xiao let go of Tang Ning's arm and walked out of the yard quickly, but Tang Ning didn't notice the hesitation and sadness on her face when she stepped out of the yard. Tang Ning could detect that Xiao Xiao didn't seem to want to go to Candy, but he just thought she was used to living in the capital and was reluctant to leave. In fact, not only her, but Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi also had the same feeling. However, Tang Ning had asked the elders to transform Candy, and believed that there would be significant changes there soon. Although the prosperity could not be compared with the capital, it would not give people the feeling of being closed in the mountains. He returned to the study, and after thinking carefully, he decided that he still had to look for Princess Anyang once. Zhao Man was confined to the palace by Emperor Chen, and Tang Ning had no way to contact her, so he still had to get rid of Princess Anyang. But this time when he went to the princess's mansion, the atmosphere was a little awkward. He had just told Prince Fu this morning that he would never see Princess Anyang again, and it seemed a bit bad that he broke his promise less than an hour later. Moreover, the embarrassing scene happened in the morning, and it was not easy for him to face Princess Anyang now. Tang Ning washed his face and washed off the lipstick on his face, and made a decision in his heart. Face was a small matter, and naturally it was not more important than the fact that he wanted to take Zhao Man away, but now was obviously not the right time to go to the princess's mansion, and he planned to go the next day. He walked out of the study and came to another courtyard. A duo was packing up her things, putting all the strange things she bought in the capital these days into a big box, and it seemed that she was going to transport them together to Guizhou. Seeing Tang Ning coming in, she hurriedly stuffed a few colorful belly bands into the box, then looked at Tang Ning with a blushing face and said, "Brother Tang, you're here." Tang Ning's eyes stayed in the box for a moment and then quickly moved away, looking around and asked, "Where is the fourth elder?" A duo pointed and said, "In the room." Tang Ning nodded, walked into the fourth elder's room, and came out a quarter of an hour later. The fourth elder Xianyi was the most accomplished in poison among the elders of the Wanggu section. Although Tang Ning had a plan in advance, he still consulted her in advance just in case. A long time ago, he mastered a drug that could make people fake death. After taking this drug, he could create a state of fake death in a short period of time. This was originally Tang Ning's plan for Zhao Man, but something happened in the Chu state at that time, so this drug was not used. Unexpectedly, 3 years later, everything returned to the starting point. The imperial doctors in the palace were skilled, but their skills were flawed. The poisonous gu technique of the Gu clan was a system of its own, which these imperial doctors had never seen and did not know much about. This was also the reason why a mere tranquilizing incense almost killed Emperor Chen. Early the next morning, Tang Ning appeared outside the princess's mansion again. The concierge of the princess's mansion was already familiar with him, and he led him directly to the courtyard where Princess Anyang was, and went in to report. After a while, a maid named Pinner came out, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, "What does Lord Tang want to discuss with the princess?" Tang Ning said, "I have some important things to discuss with the princess." "Miss Pinner, is the princess in the mansion now?" Pinner smiled and said, "If there is anything, Lord Tang will tell Pinner, and Pinner will pass it on to the princess, and it will be the same." What Tang Ning wanted to discuss with Princess Anyang was a matter of deceiving the emperor, and of course he could not talk to this little maid. Tang Ning shook her head and said, "Since the princess is not here, I will come back another day." "Who said the princess is not here?" Pinner hurried forward and said, "It's just that the princess told Pinner to stop Lord Tang and not let you in." Tang Ning looked at Pinner and asked in surprise, "Why?" "Pinner doesn't know." The little maid looked at Tang Ning and suddenly took 2 steps back, protecting her chest with her hands, and said, "But I am just a little girl. If Lord Tang wants to go in, I can't stop him." Tang Ning walked into the yard and saw Princess Anyang coming out of the room. Princess Anyang looked up and saw Tang Ning. She was startled and immediately went into the room, forgetting to close the door. When she remembered, Tang Ning had already walked in, and she immediately hid behind the screen again. What he was going to tell Princess Anyang was something that must not be known to outsiders, so Tang Ning closed the door as soon as he entered the room. "You, what are you doing?" He closed the door, and Princess Anyang's trembling voice came from behind the screen. "What else did I want to ask you?" Tang Ning looked puzzled and asked, "You are obviously at home, why don't you let me in?" "You, don't come over." When Tang Ning walked behind the screen, Princess Anyang's scream came from behind again. Tang Ning stopped and looked at a figure hiding behind the screen, and said in astonishment, "What's wrong with you? Just stand there, don't come over again." Princess Anyang stood behind the screen and explained after a long time, "I didn't sleep well last night, and I don't want to see strangers today." In fact, she didn't sleep well last night, but she couldn't sleep all night. She had never considered liking Tang Ning before. After all, although he was handsome and talented, he already had 4 wives and concubines, a fiancée and a princess waiting in line. As a princess, she couldn't marry him and become his 7th wife. However, the kiss yesterday made her realize that he might have some special feelings for Tang Ning. From the misunderstanding hug at the Tang family, to the frequent interactions between them because of Xiao Man's matter, to him handing over the Tang family's store in the capital to her, until the kiss she gave him naturally in excitement yesterday. I don't know when it started, but his position in her heart seemed different from that of others. Tang Ning was not surprised by Princess Anyang's reason. Women naturally want to show their best in front of others. When Tang Yaoyao didn't sleep well, she didn't want Tang Ning to see him with dark circles under his eyes. Tang Ning did not think much and said straight to the point, "Manor is under house arrest in the palace by His Majesty and cannot leave the palace. I need your help." He briefly told his plan. There was no movement behind the screen for a long time. Tang Ning could not help but raise his voice and asked, "Princess, are you listening to me?" Princess Anyang came back to her senses and immediately said, "Ah, yes, of course I am listening." Tang Ning asked, "Then what do you think?" Princess Anyang said, "Don't worry, I will take good care of the shops in Beijing after you leave." Tang Ning paused and said, "But I was talking about Xiao Man's matter just now." Behind the screen, Princess Anyang took a deep breath and said, "Sorry, I didn't hear it clearly just now, please say it again." Tang Ning's voice was loud enough just now, but he didn't expect Princess Anyang to be distracted behind the screen. However, he had a request, so Tang Ning couldn't say anything. He said more briefly, "It's nothing, I just want you to take a letter and something to Xiao Man." "Okay," Princess Anyang said, "put down the things and the letter, I will go to the palace in a while." Tang Ning put a porcelain bottle and a letter on the table and said, "Thank you, Princess. I don't know if you have time tonight. I will treat you to dinner." For Tang Ning, anyone he personally cooks for is a friend he truly recognizes in his heart. There are not many such people. After this period of contact, Princess Anyang's righteousness has made her one of the few friends in Tang Ning's heart. Princess Anyang stood behind the screen, calmed down, and said, "I have something to do today, let's do it another day." Princess Anyang was obviously not quite right today. Tang Ning did not want to force it, and nodded, "Since the princess is busy, let's do it another day." Princess Anyang walked out from behind the screen after hearing Tang Ning's footsteps fade away, rubbing her eye bags due to lack of sleep, with a hint of helplessness on her face. By the way, Tang Ning went back, walked to the door, looked at Princess Anyang, and said, "Princess, don't open that little bottle." After he finished speaking, he looked at Princess Anyang's big eyes that were brighter and more lively because of the new eye bags, and added, "The princess eye bags are pretty." Luan mobile version website. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 914. When Chia walked in from the outside, she saw Princess Anyang sitting in front of the bronze mirror, looking at the shadow in the mirror dreamily. She stood at the door, wrung her hands together, looked at Princess Anyang, and whispered, "Princess, Mr. Tang insists on coming in, and you can't stop him." Princess Anyang waved her hand and did not mean to care about the matter. She looked back at her and asked, "Is there anything different about me today?" Mayer looked at her and shook her head in confusion. Princess Anyang coughed lightly and said, "Let me remind you, my eyes are different from before." Mayer suddenly understood and said, "The princess's eyes are swollen, do you want me to ask the kitchen to boil 2 eggs? Stupid girl." Princess Anyang glared at her angrily and said, "You don't understand anything." Mayer stood there with a silly smile. Princess Anyang glanced at her angrily, "Why don't you come here and help me dress up? I have to go to the palace." When Tang Ning returned home, she learned that her father-in-law, Shangshu Zhoucheng, had been appointed. In 3 years, he went from a small local county magistrate to a powerful official in Shangshu province, just below the 2 prime ministers. In the entire court, Tang Ning was probably the only one who could rise faster than him. Chen Yuxian put vegetables in Zhou Mingli's bowl and muttered, "Do you think His Majesty took the wrong medicine? How long have you been a Jing Zhaoyin? Why do you want to be Minister Zhuoken again?" Zhou Mingli glanced at her and said, "Don't talk about His Majesty behind his back. It will be troublesome if others hear you." Chen Yuxian looked at Tang Ning again and asked, "Ning, how does Master Zhouchen usually get promoted?" Tang Ning put down her chopsticks and said, "Generally, Zhouchen will serve for 5 years. If there are no major mistakes, he will be transferred to one of the 6 departments as minister. He will stay in the position of minister for another 5 years. If there is an opportunity, he will be appointed as official or minister. He is the minister of the Ministry of Revenue, and he is very likely to become the prime minister in the future." Chen Yuxian has roughly understood that although the official position of Shangshu Zhuoken is the same as that of Jing Zhaoyin, he is prepared for Shangshu and prime minister. Although she is not a member of the officialdom, she also knows that her husband's transfer in recent years is by no means a normal promotion, and she is a little worried. He looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Is there any problem with this?" Tang Ning shook her head and said, "Not yet. It's just that the king is old. The power exercised by Zhoucheng, the minister, is actually the power of the prime minister. There are more errands than before. Every decision is related to the national economy and people's livelihood of Chen state." Hearing this, Chen Yuxian looked at Zhou Mingli again and said, "Did you hear that? In the future, you should be more careful in Shangshu Pavilion and don't cause trouble for Ninger again." Zhou Mingli nodded vaguely, only focusing on eating and did not respond. In the past, I didn't think anything of it in the Jingzhou mansion. But now in Shangsha province, my father-in-law has become his son-in-law's subordinate. How should I call him in Shangsha province in the future? Called Tang Xiang, where does his father-in-law's face go? If you call her Ning doesn't it mean that you have no respect for the prime minister? Tang Ning didn't think as much as Zhou Mingli expected. He could just foresee that in the days when Wang Xiang and he were both away from Shangsha province, Shangsha Zhuokan would be the top leader of Shangsha province, and he could live a good life as a prime minister. Changning Palace. Princess Anyang handed a letter and a porcelain vase to Zhao Man and said, "This is what he asked me to bring to you." Zhao Man put the things away, hugged her arm, and said happily, "Thank you, Sister Anyang. When I escape, I will definitely repay you." Princess Anyang pinched her nose and said, "You are going to elope with him, how can you repay me?" Zhao Man thought for a while and said, "Then I will let my husband repay you first." Speaking of repay, Princess Anyang thought of the kiss she offered on her own initiative, her face turned red, but her tone was a little sour as she said, "I haven't married yet, so I'm calling you husband-in-law so soon." Zhao Man was a little shy. Seeing that Princess Anyang looked haggard, she hurriedly changed the subject and said, "You don't look good. Are you sick? Do you want to ask the imperial doctor to take a look at you? Isn't it because—" Princess Anyang subconsciously said something angry, but she felt something was wrong halfway through. She couldn't tell Zhao Man that the reason why she stayed up all night was because she thought about her lover brother all night. It would be strange if sisters turned against each other. Okay, I'm fine." She waved her hand, changed the subject, looked at Zhao Man, and said, "Tell me, how did you two meet?" Zhao Man's face turned red as she remembered the past with Tang Ning. She lowered her head and whispered, "Ah, why are you talking about this? Tell me, don't be so stingy." "Well, okay then." Zhao Man nodded and said, "Actually, at the beginning, we often quarreled, but later." In fact, Princess Anyang has watched Zhao Man and Tang Ning's journey together, and she also knows very well how much effort Tang Ning has made for the relationship between the two of them. He went to Chu alone, risked his life, and brought her back from Chu after being married. Now, in order to take her to elope, he did not hesitate to commit the crime of deceiving the emperor. For a woman, if she has her sweetheart like this, what else can she ask for in a husband? She just asked casually to change the subject. When she saw the happy expression on Zhao Man's face, the sadness in her heart became even stronger. Finally she couldn't bear to listen anymore, stood up and said, "I'm going back first." Zhao Man pouted and said, "I haven't finished talking yet. Tell your husband." Princess Anyang reached out and tapped her forehead, sighed inwardly, and walked out of Changning Palace. Not long after Princess Anyang left, Zhao Man opened the envelope, read it, and threw it into the brazier and burned it. She took out the porcelain bottle and poured out a pill from it. Yangshan Palace. Emperor Chen no longer needed to be supported by others to walk. He paced slowly in the palace, looked at Wei Jian who came in, and asked, "How is Manus' illness?" Wei Jian sighed and said, "The imperial physician said it is not optimistic." A trace of anger appeared on Emperor Chen's face, and he said angrily, "This can't be cured, and that can't be cured. What are these imperial physicians doing? Do I keep them for nothing?" 2 days ago, Princess Pingyang Zhao Man suddenly fell ill. After the imperial physician diagnosed her, he also prescribed a few doses of medicine, but she took it for 2 days, and her condition not only did not improve, but worsened. This is why Emperor Chen was angry at the moment. Wei Jian thought for a moment and said, "Your Majesty, Imperial Physician Ling said that the princess may be suffering from lovesickness. Should we call Lord Tang?" Emperor Chen frowned, thought for a moment, and finally said, "Summon him to the palace." After half an hour, Tang Ning followed Wei Jian into Changning Palace. Wei Jian looked at him and said, "Lord Tang, the princess is in your hands." After he finished speaking, he looked at the eunuchs and maids in the palace and said, "You all should leave. Let Lord Tang treat the princess." After the eunuchs and maids in the palace left, Wei Jian closed the palace door. Tang Ning walked to the bed. Even though he knew that all this was an illusion, he still felt distressed when he saw Zhao Man lying on the bed with a pale face and weakness. When Zhao Man saw him coming in, she immediately got up from the bed and said happily, "I really fooled even the imperial physician." The imperial physician had never seen this kind of medicine before, and the imperial physician Ling Yuheng was his nephew. It was not difficult to create the illusion that she was seriously ill. The difficult part was how he could take Zhao Man out of the palace. If he said that her illness could only be cured by the elders of the Gu tribe in Kandy, and took her to Kandy, although it was the most direct way, Emperor Chen would definitely not believe it. In this case, he could only arrange a scene of the princess's fake death according to the plan. Tang Ning comforted Zhao Man for a while and then walked out of Changning Palace. If he stayed here any longer, he would probably arouse other people's suspicion. After all, no matter how long it took to take the pulse, it would not take half an hour. Who knows, someone might suspect that he did something else here. When he returned to the mansion, he saw a man running wildly from the street to the gate of the Tang mansion from a distance. The man was in tattered clothes and covered in dust. It was obvious that he had traveled a long way. Tang Ning walked over quickly and looked at the beggar's sect elder he had sent to the western regions to protect his mother and Tang Shui. He asked quickly, "Hong Qi, why are you here?" Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 915. Boss, something happened in the western regions. Hong Qi's face was pale and his lips were chapped. He had obviously been traveling for a long time. After saying a word, he fainted. Tang Ning looked at the doorman who rushed forward and said in a deep voice, "Help him in." A quarter of an hour later, Hong Qi woke up slowly in bed. He sat up suddenly and looked at Tang Ning, saying guiltily, "It was my subordinates who failed to protect the Madam and Miss Tang." Although Tang Ning was anxious, he tried his best to remain calm on his face and said, "What happened? Please tell me slowly." Hong Qi gulped down a cup of tea, then lowered his head and said, "We escorted the Madam and Miss Tang to the western regions. Although we encountered many horse thieves along the way, they saw that we were outnumbered and did not dare to provoke us. But 10 days ago, when we were preparing to return, we encountered tens of thousands of troops from Xiaoan." Listening to Hong Qi's description, Tang Ning's heart sank. The reason why he summoned so many elite members of the beggars sect to send them to the western regions was that he was worried that they would encounter some danger in the western regions. 2,000 fully armed beggars sect disciples would not have any major problems unless they encountered a few large countries in the western regions with their troops coming out in full force. And those few large countries would never start a war for a caravan with not much goods. Tang Ning thought he had made thorough preparations, but he still missed that one possibility. Xiaoan's target was obviously not them. Tang Ning learned from Hong Qi that 10 days ago, Xiaoan had dispatched tens of thousands of troops and had just conquered a medium-sized country in the western regions. On the way back, they happened to meet their team and mistook them for the remnants of this country. More than 2,000 people were captured. Hong Qi knew that they were far from being the opponent of Xiaoan's army, and there was no possibility of escape, so he immediately dispersed dozens of people to report back to Beijing. In the past 10 days, he almost traveled without sleep, and only arrived in the capital today. He got off the bed, knelt on one knee, and whispered, "This is all my fault, please punish me." "Get up." Tang Ning patted his shoulder and said, "You have tried your best, have a good rest, and leave the next thing to me." When he walked out of the room, Tang Ning breathed a sigh of relief. Although the matter was difficult, it was not the worst. The attitude of Zioan country towards prisoners was better than that of Chenchu, two countries of etiquette, but to exchange them from Zioan, it would require a transaction between countries. There were some things that Tang Ning did not want Emperor Chen to know. If this matter was resolved by the court, it would only make things more complicated. Tang Ning had planned everything, but because of this sudden incident, he had to change it. Seeing his solemn expression, Su Mei walked forward and asked with concern, "What's wrong?" Tang Ning thought about it, looked at her and said, "Take Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi to Candy first." Su Mei frowned and asked, "What about you?" Tang Ning said, "My mother and the others had some problems in the western regions, I have to go to the western regions." Su Mei said without hesitation, "I will go with you." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "You are a saint, I will feel at ease if you stay in Candy. Don't worry, I will take the old beggar, Lao Zheng, and the 4th and 8th elders with me this time. Nothing will happen." Su Mei thought about it, and a trace of helplessness appeared on her face. She said, "After returning to Candy, I will let several elders go to the western regions to meet you." Tang Ning did not refuse. He didn't want to make too much noise when he went to the western regions this time. With Lao Zheng and the old beggar, plus several elders of the Wangu sect, if they act carefully and don't go head-on with large countries in the western regions, they are enough to match an undefeated army. The sudden change in the western regions affected the whole body, and Tang Ning's other plans had to be changed in time. Originally, he planned to settle them in Candy first, and then go to Chu to pick up Li Tianlan. Now the trip to Chu had to be postponed, at least until he returned from the western regions. He went back to the study and wrote a letter, and asked someone to send it to Chu, explaining to Li Tianlan the reason for the postponement of the agreement, and then came to Anyang Princess's mansion again. The matter in the western regions had to be dealt with as soon as possible, so that Tang Ning would not have time to take Zhao Man away. At Anyang Princess's mansion, Tang Ning just stepped into the gate and ran into Prince Fu and Princess Anyang, who were walking towards him. Before he could greet Prince Fu snorted coldly and said, "Didn't you say you wouldn't come here?" "Father, what are you talking about?" Princess Anyang glared at him, then looked at Tang Ning and said, "Come in and talk." Prince Fu looked at the two people leaving and sighed leisurely. In Princess Anyang's room, after hearing Tang Ning's words, she angrily said, "What, you're not going to take Xiao Man away?" Tang Ning explained, "Something happened in the western regions. I have to go there first. After I deal with the things there, I will come back to pick her up." "What could happen in the western regions?" Princess Anyang's voice fell, her expression suddenly became nervous, subconsciously grabbed his hand, and asked, "Is Shui in trouble?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "They fell into Xiao Wan's hands, I'm going to rescue them." Princess Anyang said, "How are you going to rescue them?" Tang Ning said, "Don't worry, I have my own way." Xiao Wan was an opponent that even Chen Guo had a headache for. Princess Anyang didn't know how Tang Ning could rescue Tang Shui from there, but seeing how confident he was, she couldn't help but feel reassured. Then she realized that she was still holding Tang Ning's hand tightly and hurriedly let go, with an imperceptible blush appearing on her face. "Xiao Man, please leave it to the princess." Tang Ning hugged her fists and said, "I'm leaving." Seeing him leaving, Princess Anyang hurriedly chased after him, looked at his back, and said loudly, "You should be careful yourself too." Tang Ning waved her hand behind her and did not look back. Princess Anyang watched his back disappear from sight, with deep worry in her eyes. After a moment, she said with some self-pity, "If I were in danger, would you be so nervous?" Nourish the temple. Since he stopped using ancient incense, Chen Wang's health has improved day by day. Although the recovery is a bit slow, he finally sees hope of living. After the incident with concubine Tang Hui, he no longer had the habit of using incense to sleep. Every step of the meals cooked in the imperial kitchen, from the selection of raw materials to cooking and serving, had to go through heavy inspections. Finally, after the eunuchs tested the poison, only then can you eat. Including the soup sent by Run Wang Zhaoyuan is no exception. Chen Huang walked around the hall a few times as a habit. Feeling a little tired, he lay back on the bed and asked, "How is Manus' illness?" A smile appeared on Wei Jian's face and he said, "Back to your highness, the princess's health suddenly improved in the past 2 days, and the imperial doctor said there is nothing serious." Emperor Chen shook his head and said, "No matter how much the imperial doctor tries to cure her, Tang Ning can go to the palace and talk to her for a few words, but I wonder if her illness is fake." Wei Jian smiled, but there was no interaction. Chen Huang thought of something and suddenly asked, "Where is Tang Ning, has she left?" Wei Jian took a step forward and said, "Your Majesty, Mr. Tang left Beijing early yesterday morning." So fast, Emperor Chen frowned and said, "It seems that my position as Prime Minister of the Chen Kingdom is really not attractive at all in his eyes. Right Chancellor Tang Ning, although he is the Prime Minister of the current dynasty, he is a very special Prime Minister. The Minister of Finance is responsible for important state affairs. As the head of a province, the Prime Minister is not the one who works hard, wakes up earlier than a chicken, and goes to bed later than a dog. However, he does not care much about court affairs, but has the thoughts to lead. While traveling with his family, what is even more incomprehensible is that His Majesty actually acquiesced to his actions. Comparing people with others will lead to death, and goods will be thrown away. Ordinary officials will be fined half a month's salary if they are late for a moment. Right Prime Minister Tang Ning openly takes his family to play. His Majesty still loves him very much. I don't know how many people are in his heart. Such a sigh. In Prince Huai's palace, Bai Jin looked at Prince Huai and said, "Tang Ning is leaving the capital. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you." King Huai looked into the distance, shook his head and said, "No, now is not the time." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 916. Shazhu is the last inhabited place in the west of Chen State. After leaving Shazhu, less than 10 miles to the north is Yangguan, and more than 100 miles to the northwest is Yumengguan. Beyond Yangguan and Yumengguan, it is the territory of the western regions. Shazhu is located on the edge of the desert, surrounded by desert gobi all year round. It is short of water all year round. The people have suffered from the sandstorm for a long time. In Shazhu city, people can be seen everywhere covering their faces with gray cloth to prevent inhalation of sand and dust. Women rarely go out, and even if they go out, they must cover their faces with light gauze. The weather here is dry and the wind and sand are strong, which will cause great damage to their delicate skin. Although Shazhu is remote, it is not poor. This is because it is a must-pass place for merchants from the western regions and Chen State to enter and exit the customs. A large number of caravans stay here every month. Some of them are Chen State merchants traveling from Chen State to the western regions, and some are western region merchants entering the customs from the western regions. The goods of these merchants stay in Shazhu and they have to pay part of the tariff. Whether it was western region merchants selling western region specialties to the state of Chen, or Chen State merchants bringing silk, tea, etc. to the western regions, they could not avoid Shazhu. The tax silver paid by these merchants alone accounted for a considerable part of the treasury income of the state of Chen. And the Shazhu government naturally made a lot of money in this process. A large number of caravans stayed in Shazhu, which greatly promoted the commercial development of Shazhu. In the state city, there were many inns, restaurants, and brothels. It was the most prosperous city in the northwest border of the state of Chen. Prosperity is prosperity, but the crisis shrouding Shazhu has become more and more serious as the situation in the western regions changes. To the east of Shazhu is the state of Chen, and to the west is the western regions. Once there is a change in the western regions, Shazhu will definitely bear the brunt. In the past few years, Zioan's rise has been unstoppable. At present, their energy is still focused on conquering the small countries in the western regions. When they completely conquer the western regions, it will be the time for the disaster of the state of Chen to come. In order to cope with the changes in the western regions, after the imperial court pacified the grassland, it stationed 400,000 troops in Shazhou and Suzhou and other places, and reinforced the city wall of Shazhou to more than 2 meters wide and 5 meters high, creating a copper wall in this vast sea of sand. With heavy guards, the towering city walls stand tall from afar, which finally makes the people of Shazhou feel a little more at ease. They hope that Zioan will lose in the struggle for power in the western regions, or that the imperial court will simply send troops to pacify the western regions, so as to maintain the long-term stability of Shazhou. At this moment, at the city gate on the east side of Shazhou, a group of people led horses slowly into the city, attracting frequent sidelong glances from passers-by. Shazhou welcomes many outsiders every day, some of whom are from the capital and some from the western regions. The people in the city have long been accustomed to it, but the composition of this group of people is too strange, which makes people have to take a few more glances. Walking in front were 3 young men and women. The men were handsome and the women were pretty. A couple looked to be in their early 20s, and the other girl was only 28 years old and still looked a little immature. There was nothing strange about these 3 people except that they looked pleasing to the eye. The strange thing was the people behind them. A sturdy middle-aged man followed behind them, with a butcher knife on his waist, which destroyed the extraordinary temperament of the 3 people in front. Next to the middle-aged man was an old man in dirty clothes, dressed like a beggar, scratching his butt and picking his nose from time to time, looking extremely sloppy. Behind the 2 people, there were several figures, 3 old men and 3 old women, all of whom were old, following them step by step, like servants. This combination made everyone confused. If they were to ask which nobleman was traveling with his beautiful daughter, they should have brought some guards. But among these people, only the middle-aged man with a butcher knife on his waist looked like a guard. The rest were all elderly people who looked like they had 1 foot in the ground. I'm afraid that a little travel would cost them their lives. Tang Ning naturally noticed the strange looks of the passers-by around him, but the truth is often not as outsiders see. These elderly people who looked like they had 1 foot in the ground were not easy to deal with when they started fighting. Any one of them could easily destroy a small country in the western regions. It was not difficult for the 6 elders of the Wangu sect to join forces and destroy a medium-sized country with a population of thousands. Together with the 4th and 8th elders who were by Tang Ning's side before, when Tang Ning entered Shazhou, 6 elders of the Wangu sect had gathered around him. If the 10 sects had not just been integrated and a few elders had to stay to handle the affairs of the sect, Tang Ning felt that Sumei would send out all the new 10 elders. The elders of the Wangu sect might not be the opponents of Lao Zheng alone, but they could play a role like nuclear weapons against ordinary people, even some minor masters, which was beyond the reach of Lao Zheng and the old beggar. As for Tang Yao Yao and Xiao Xiao, they were just here to join in the fun. The reason why Tang Ning did not stop them was that Tang Yao Yao said she came to see if he would mess around in the western regions. If Tang Ning did not let her follow, wouldn't it make her look guilty? Xiao Xiao, who always listened to Tang Ning, did not listen to his arrangements this time and wanted to follow them to the western regions. Tang Ning could see that she seemed to have a slight resistance to Qiandi, so he did not insist. Unlike Xiru and Xiaoi, the 2 of them had a certain ability to protect themselves, especially Xiao Xiao. Now even Tang Ning could not see through her depth, and Tang Yao Yao was no longer her opponent a long time ago. Taking the 2 of them with me is not only not a problem, but also a help. What's more, he didn't come to the western regions to confront Xiao Wan head-on. Tang Ning would not use other means if he could negotiate peacefully. Shazhou was much more prosperous and wealthy than Tang Ning had imagined. He originally thought that this was a run-down border town at the junction of Chen State and the western regions. Unexpectedly, Although Shazhu city was small, it had everything it needed. Walking to the main street of Shazhu, looking at the shops on both sides of the street with customers coming in an endless stream, Tang Ning even thought he had come to the capital. Of course, there is still a big difference between here and the capital. The most obvious difference is that only half of the faces on the street are Han people, and the western region's people with high cheekbones and high noses occupy the other small half. There are also some people whose appearance is more different from that of Han people and not exactly the same as that of western region's people. I think they are from countries further west. Of course, there were more western women along the way. Most of them wore clothes that were very different from those of Han women. Some of them even exposed their navels. Tang Ning even saw several foreign girls wearing ornaments on their navels. The exotic atmosphere in Shazhu city was much stronger than that in the capital. However, the weather was not very good today. The sky in the distance was filled with dust. Many people wore scarves when they went out. Tang Ning and his party did not prepare such things. Xiao Xiao, who was standing beside him, coughed several times along the way. It seemed that she was not used to the air here. When Tang Ning was about to remind her to buy a scarf later, he suddenly felt a pain in his waist on the other side. Tang Yao Yao took his arm and asked with a smile, "Does it look good?" Although she was smiling, her teeth were clenched tightly, and one of her delicate hands pinched the soft flesh on his waist. Tang Ning retracted his gaze and immediately said without looking away, in broad daylight, in the open air, "You are naked? How shameful, how shameful. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 917. Until Tang Ning found an inn, booked the second floor of the inn, and settled down temporarily in Shazhu, a certain part of his waist still hurt. Xiao Xiao gave him a helpless look, closed her door and went to take a shower. After entering the room, Tang Yao Yao snorted coldly and sat on the bed without saying anything. Tang Ning sighed secretly. He admitted that he had indeed incurred more debts of love, but he would not be so tasteless as to be tempted by seeing a few foreign women with exposed belly on the street. Don't worry about the jealous Tang Yajing, she will be fine in a while. Tang Ning was worried about his mother and Tang Shui who were in Xiaoan. Xiaoan was different from Chenchu and Qiandi. Tang Ning had no eyes and ears there, and those elite members of the beggar gang, except Hong Qi, did not escape alone. I am afraid that they all became prisoners of Xiaoan. No matter how urgent his heart was, what he needed to do now was to calm down and collect information about the western regions and Xiaoan. In addition, they also need at least one guide who is proficient in the language of the western regions. After all, none of them knows the language of the western regions. If they rashly enter the western regions, they will encounter unimaginable obstacles in communication because they cannot communicate with the language. However, this is not difficult. The western regions and the state of Chen have traded with each other in the early years. In Shazhu city, there are many people who make a living by translating, called interpreters. They are proficient in the languages of both places. Merchants from the western regions and the state of Chen are willing to hire them and follow the caravan all the way. They only need to pay them a part of the remuneration. Although the languages of dozens of small countries in the western regions are not exactly the same, except for a few countries, the languages are similar. Generally speaking, hiring 2 interpreters is enough to solve the problem of communication. As for big countries like Xiaoan and Wuzhen, there are already many envoys who are proficient in Chinese, so there is no need to worry about communication. Even so, just in case, before setting off, Tang Ning still plans to find a reliable interpreter. Seeing Tang Ning sitting at the table without speaking for a long time, Tang Yao Yao slowly came over and whispered, "Don't worry, didn't you say Xiaoan is always very good to the captives, they will be fine." Tang Ning sighed lightly and said, if I had stopped them from coming to the western regions, it would be fine. Tang Yao Yao shook her head and said, my cousin wants to come to the western regions to find her parents. Even if you want to stop her, you can't stop her. She suddenly thought of something, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, if cousin Tang Shui finds her parents, can your engagement be cancelled? Tang Ning nodded. The engagement between Tang Ning and Tang Shui was made by both parents, and both parents can naturally cancel it. Tang Yao Yao asked again, what if she doesn't find it? The ancients attached great importance to trust and promises. Parents' orders and matchmakers' words, a marriage made by both parties, one party naturally cannot break the contract, this is etiquette. If the other party has passed away, this agreement cannot be easily violated, otherwise it will be despised by thousands of people. But, we can't really let him and Tang Shui fulfill the agreement made by their parents, right? Cousin turned into a wife, thinking of that possibility. Tang Ning swallowed his saliva, tapped Tang Yao Yao's forehead, and said righteously, what are you thinking about all day long? Go take a shower, we still have to go out to do things after you wash. Tang Ning exposed her dirty thoughts. Tang Yao Yao went to take a shower in shame. The air in Shazhu today was very bad, and the air was filled with wind and sand. She and Xiao Xiao had been walking outside for so long that they couldn't stand it. Tang Ning sat at the table, waiting for Tang Yao Yao to take a shower and go out together. For some reason, an idea suddenly emerged in his mind. After a moment, he sank his face, slapped himself lightly, spit hard, and said angrily, bah, scum. Although Shazhu is located in the desert, the weather is hot and the air is not very good, the quality of the fruits here is very good. Tang Yao Yao and Xiao Xiao each held a piece of melon, and Tang Ning was holding a bunch of grapes. Due to the large temperature difference between day and night in Shazhu, the fruits grown here are very easy to accumulate sugar. Tang Ning has eaten a lot of tribute fruits, but they can't compare with the local fresh goods. It is said that the further west you go outside Yumen Pass, the sweeter the fruits produced, but they are not durable in preservation. Only in the local area can you taste their original taste. With the lesson just now, Tang Ning's eyes no longer look at those women with exposed navels and forearms. He asked about the place to hire interpreters, and walked towards the interpretation office while strolling with Xiao Tang Yao Yao. The interpretation office in Shazhu is not an official institution, but a spontaneous organization of the people. After passing the assessment of the interpretation office, you can become an interpreter and can be recommended by the interpretation office to the Chen state or the western region's caravan that needs interpreters. Correspondingly, the interpretation office will also extract part of their remuneration as a reward for recommendation. In addition, there are some people who have not passed the assessment of the interpretation bureau, and they usually do some translation business. The level of these interpreters is generally not very high, and only some small caravans will hire them to save money. These are what Tang Ning learned from the waiter of the inn. Tang Ning naturally still hopes to recruit a reliable interpreter, so he did not take a second look at the unlicensed interpreters wandering outside the interpretation bureau. As soon as he stepped into the interpretation bureau, a manager came up to him and asked enthusiastically, "Sir, do you need an interpreter?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "I need an interpreter who is proficient in the languages of the western regions. Do you have any recommendations?" Proficient in the languages of various countries, the steward was stunned, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, "May I ask, sir, which countries are the various countries specifically?" Tang Ning asked, "Isn't there an interpreter who understands all the languages of the country?" The steward was stunned again, and then said with a smile, "Young master is joking, there are more than 30 countries in the western region, large and small, and almost every country has a different language. How can there be an interpreter who understands the languages of all countries at the same time?" Although Tang Ning's ultimate destination for this trip was Xiaoan, in order to avoid any mishaps along the way, It was better to be well prepared. He originally thought that if someone could speak multiple languages, he would be able to save a lot of trouble. But now it seems, but I took it a little bit for granted. At this time, a young man suddenly came up and said, "Don't listen to him. If you want an interpreter, you can come to me. I am proficient in the languages of the 36 countries in the western regions, and I am familiar with the terrain of the western regions. The price is fair, and the price is reasonable, bully." When the steward saw the young man, he kicked him hard on the butt and said angrily, "Bahir, if you make trouble here again, I'll have your legs broken." The young man was kicked and ran away quickly. The steward looked at Tang Ning and said with a smile, "This is just a scoundrel. Young master, don't worry about him." Tang Ning ignored the young man, looked at the steward, and said, "Then find someone who is proficient in Zioan language." Zioan, the steward's expression changed and he said, "Master, are you going to Zioan?" Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Why, isn't there an interpreter here who understands Zioan dialect?" "That's not true." The steward shook his head and said, "A few years ago, Zioan was just a small country with a population of only a few hundred. There were not many interpreters here who knew Zioan dialect, but there were a few. The problem is that now in the western region the biggest reason for the tense situation is Zioan, which is very dangerous, and there are no interpreters willing to go to Zioan." Tang Ning looked at the steward and said, "Just ask for me, money is not an issue." The steward said, "There are 2 interpreters here who understand Zioan dialect. Master, please wait here for a moment while I go and ask for you." The steward left the lobby and came back after a while, shaking his head and saying, "Sir, what a coincidence. The 2 interpreters went elsewhere with the caravan yesterday, and they won't be able to come back until 2 months at the earliest." Tang Ning couldn't wait for 2 months. He felt a little regretful, thanked the manager, and planned to leave. "Young master," he was about to turn around when the steward stopped him again and said, "Nothing is as important as life. I would like to advise you not to go to Zioan." "Thank you for reminding me." Tang Ning smiled and threw a piece of silver over. The steward subconsciously took it. After weighing it, he found that there were at least 10 taels of silver in his hand. He was overjoyed and immediately put it away. He bowed to Tang Ning's leaving background before turning around and leaving. At the same time, in the interpretation hall, the eyes of several people who happened to see the scene suddenly lit up. Tang Ning walked out of the interpretation center, feeling a little disappointed. Just as he was about to go back to the inn to think of another solution, a voice suddenly came from behind him. "Are you going to Zioan?" Tang Ning turned around and saw the young man who had just been kicked away by the steward walking towards him. Tang Ning looked at the young man named Bahir and asked, "Do you understand Zioan dialect?" Bahir raised his head and said, "Didn't I just say that I am proficient in the 36 languages of the western regions? In addition to Zioan, I also understand Dayo, Kyosai, Wuzun." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "There are so many interpreters who dare not go to Zioan. Aren't you afraid of death?" "They know nothing." Bahir glanced disdainfully and said, "I'm familiar with the situation in the western regions. No country is safer than Zioan. If Zioan can't go, then you can't go anywhere in the western regions." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 918. Tang Ning didn't know whether the young man named Bahir in front of him really knew the languages of the 36 countries in the western regions, but what he said about the countries in the western regions, Zioan was the safest, made him look at this person in a different light. Guangxia Literature Network. Tang Ning looked at him and continued to ask, "Zioan is the source of the chaos in the western region. Why do you say that Zioan is the safest? You don't know this." Bahir glanced at him and said, "The western region is very chaotic. Horse bandits are rampant. Some small countries, which appear to be one country on the surface, are actually countries of bandits. They specialize in robbing the past. Caravans, especially your Chengguo caravan, but Zioan is different. As long as you are not a person with ulterior motives, you can travel unimpeded in Zioan city. Although you have to pay a tax to enter the city, after paying this money, you will be protected by Zioan's army, and no one will dare to bully you in the city. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Have you been to Zioan?" Bagler said disdainfully, "Of course, how else would I know this?" Tang Ning asked again, "You said you are familiar with the western regions." Bagler said proudly, "I have grown up in the western region since I was a child. I know the location, military strength, customs, and habits of each country. If you choose me as your interpreter, you will make a profit." Tang Ning asked, "Since you are so familiar with the western regions, do you know what the current situation is like in the western regions?" "You've got to ask the right person." Bagler looked at Tang Ning proudly and said, "Of the 36 countries in the western region, there are only about 20 left. In the past 2 years, 16 countries have been conquered. The other countries were annexed. In today's western region, Zioan, Daewoo, and Wuzhen are the most powerful. Most of the other small and medium-sized countries rely on them for survival. Among them, Zioan is rising very quickly and poses the greatest threat to other countries. Daewoo and Wuzhen have already planned to join forces to deal with Zioan." As a native of the western regions, Bagler talked endlessly about the situation in the countries in the western regions, including countless treasures, which was more detailed than what Tang Ning learned from the imperial court. Tang Ning looked at him and said, "Last question, do you really understand the languages of the 36 countries in the western regions?" Bagler blushed and said, "Although I don't understand everything, I guarantee that if you want to go to Zioan, I can bring you to Zioan city smoothly." Tang Ning looked at him, nodded, and said, "It's just you." "Wait a minute." Bagler waved his hand and said, "You've finished asking, now it's my turn." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "What do you want to ask?" Bagler said, "I will take you to Zioan, how much money can you give me?" Tang Ning held out a finger. 10 taels. Bagler frowned and said, "You are sending beggars. Let me tell you, the western regions are very chaotic and there are many horse thieves. If you go to the western regions to do business, but you tie your head to your belt, this business is less than 5 taels. 12, don't even think about it." Tang Ning shook her head. 100 taels. Bagler's eyes lit up, he clapped his hands and said, "Young master, please come to me next time you go to the western regions. I'll give you less money. 1,000 taels. Tang Ning looked at him and said, "You are only responsible for showing the way. As long as you take us to Zioan, I will give you 1,000 taels." Bagler stood there stunned. After a moment, he wiped his saliva and asked uncertainly, "How much?" Tang Ning took out a stack of silver notes and handed it to him, saying, "This is a deposit of 500 taels. When we get to Zioan, I will give you the remaining 500 taels." 5 silver notes are very light, but Bagler feels as if they are as heavy as a stone. In all his years of living, he has never seen a banknote worth 100 taels, let alone 5. What made him unbelievable the most was that the banknote was now his. With lightning speed, he put the banknotes into his arms and solemnly said, "I, Bagler, swear to God that I will bring you to Zioan." At the entrance of the interpretation hall, several figures walking out of the hall were shocked when they saw this scene. A man with a ferocious expression grinned and said excitedly, "Big fat sheep." On the main street of Shazhu, Bagler looked excited. He looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Sir, are you going to Zioan to do business?" Tang Ning said, "Have fun." Bagler glanced at him in surprise and said, "Young master, if you want to travel, don't go to Zioan. Kanaz is the garden of gods. The scenery is much better than Zioan, and it is much closer." Tang Ning smiled and said, "You just need to take us to Zioan." Bahar secretly glanced at Tang Ning and secretly cursed in his heart. I really don't understand the thoughts of these rich people. They actually go to such a place to play. The horse thieves in the western regions are no joke. I hope their guards are better, otherwise even he didn't dare to leave the city. Tang Ning stopped continuing the topic and asked, will Zioan rob passing caravans? No. Bahar shook his head and said, in the western region, other countries would do this kind of thing, but Zioan would not. In the past few years, Zioan has slowly developed by relying on trade with caravans. They never do such treacherous things. Now the merchants don't go to Zioan, not because they are afraid of Zioan, but because they are afraid of horse thieves and those bandits. Tang Ning didn't know why Zioan took action against the 2,000 people, but it seemed that the situation was better than he imagined. He looked at Bahar and continued to ask, how do they usually treat prisoners? Well. Bahar thought for a while and said, they will keep those prisoners and exchange them for prisoners later. Tang Ning finally calmed down. It seemed that Zioan had captured them in order to prepare for the war with Chen State. Using Chen State's captured generals and people to exchange Zioan's prisoners captured by Chen State was their usual practice. S method. Bahar's performance was much better than Tang Ning expected. He was not only an interpreter, but the information he provided was also what Tang Ning needed. The information he provided now was worth 1,000 taels of silver. He was walking on the street, and at a certain moment, he suddenly stopped. At the same time, Tang Yao Yao and Xiao Xiao's footsteps suddenly stopped. Bahar stopped, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, are you here? No. Tang Ning smiled and turned to a remote alley. Bahar followed him in. After going around 2 streets, they found a dead end in front of them. Tang Ning walked to the alley and finally stopped. Bahar looked at the dead end in front of him, and then at Tang Ning. As if he thought of something, his face suddenly turned pale. He took a few steps back, covered his butt, and said in a trembling voice, Master, Master, please take the lead. What am I doing here? Tang Ning didn't answer. She looked back and saw several figures walking from behind, blocking the way they came. Seeing the man at the head, Bahar turned pale and said in a trembling voice, Sand Scorpion. The man strode forward, glanced at Bahar, and said, Bahar, leave the banknote and get out of here. It's none of your business here. Bahar's face turned pale. Sand Scorpion was the man's nickname. He was one of the most famous bullies in Shazhu city. Many small caravans had been blackmailed by him. He was afraid of Sand Scorpion, but he was even more afraid of losing the 1,000 taels of silver. If he had these 1,000 taels of silver, he would no longer have to work as an interpreter for the rest of his life, nor would he have to tuck his head in his belt. He looked at Sand Scorpion and mustered up the courage to say, Brother Sand Scorpion. Get out. The man glared at him and said, I'll count to 3. If you don't get out, just stay with them. He glanced at Bahar and said, 1. He only said one word, and there was a sudden pain in his neck, his vision went dark, and he fainted. Bang, bang, bang. After a few muffled sounds, Xiao Xiao clapped his hands, looked at the people lying on the ground, and said, It's done. Tang Ning took several money bags from those people's waists, weighed them, and found that there were only a few taels of silver. She threw them to Bahar and said, Let's go. Bahar glanced at the little Didi girl with frightened eyes. After he recovered, he glanced at the unconscious people lying on the ground, opened the money bag in his hand, and slapped Sand Scorpion's butt hard. He kicked his foot and said, You damn poor guy. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 919. Shazhu is very remote and chaotic. According to Bahar, although there are no horse thieves in the city, ruffians like Sand Scorpion are still very rampant. This chapter was first published on AI, U, Sheng, Novel Network, Please remember the URL. Large caravans are okay, but some small caravans with not very strong escorts are usually blackmailed by them. They have to pay a sum of protection silver to avoid financial losses and disasters. Bahir followed Tang Ning to the door of the inn. He looked back and saw that no one was following him. He was relieved secretly, but he still reminded him, "Sir, Shazhu is not as good as your capital city. It's very chaotic here. You have to remember that if you don't have money, Lu Bai, if we are targeted by someone more powerful, we won't be able to leave Shazhu." "I understand." Tang Ning nodded, handed him 2 more 100 tael banknotes, and said, "Please prepare what supplies you need to leave the city. We will officially set off in 3 days." Bahir looked at the banknote, his eyes lit up again, and said, "We need to rent a few camels, and prepare food and water." "Don't worry, sir, these things are all taken care of by me. I will definitely help you get it done properly." In the desert, camels were more suitable for long-distance travel than horses. Bahir was a native of the western regions and was very familiar with these things, so Tang Ning left all these chores to him. In the past 3 days, he took Xiao Xiao and Tang Yao Yao to visit Shazhu city on the first day, but they were unwilling to come out on the second day. The air quality in Shazhu has been really bad these days. The sky is gray. When the wind blows, it seems like there will be sand hitting the face. Both women are very concerned about their beautiful faces and do not want them to be eroded by the wind and sand. Simply hide in the inn and not come out. The 6 elders of Wangu sect have been staying in the inn since the first day, and even the meals were brought in. They didn't talk much along the way, and spent their free time studying poison and poison techniques. Before they left, Sumei taught them some of the poison techniques in the 10,000 Poison Sutras. Several elders felt like they had found a treasure, and even a little "I don't want to waste my study time." The population of Kazhu is also in the millions, and it is not just luck that they can take the position of the top 10 elders. 3 days later, when Tang Ning finished breakfast and walked downstairs with them, Bahir was already waiting outside. He looked at Tang Ning and asked respectfully, "Sir, the camels have been bought, food, water, tents, etc. have also been arranged. When will we set off?" Tang Ning did not ask Bahir if he had any money left. He nodded and said, "If you are ready, let's set off now." Bahir carried a big baggage on his back and said, "Zioan is deep in the desert. We are going to Zioan city. We have to cross almost half of the desert. We start from the west gate, leave Yangguan, and go all the way west. Just leave." After he finished speaking, he looked at Tang Ning and asked in surprise, "Master, where are your guards? The western region is very chaotic. There are horse bandits everywhere. Without strong enough guards, if you go deep into the western region, you will die. Don't look at the little girl yesterday who was very fast. But if you encounter dozens or hundreds of horse bandits in the desert, one person's skills, it won't have any effect." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "Let's leave the city first and then talk about it." Bahir naturally thought that their guards were waiting outside the city. Otherwise, how could they go deep into the western region? Is it because of these old people who had trouble even climbing on a camel? Strange to say, he originally thought that Mr. Tang was taking his 2 lovely wives to experience exotic customs, but today he discovered that these old people were traveling with them. As an interpreter, he had traveled back and forth from the western region several times. "I have led many small caravans, but I have never seen such a strange group of people." However, these have nothing to do with him. Although it is a long way to Zioan, this trip is enough for him to have food and clothing for the rest of his life. It is worth taking a risk for this. The place where the camels are rented is just outside the city. When a few people were walking towards the west gate, on the other side of the street, the man named Shasya gave a few people a cold look and waved, "Follow me." Counting Bahir, there were a total of 12 people on Tang Ning's trip. Bahur rented 15 camels, 3 of which carried water, food, tents, and other daily necessities. Coming out of the place where the camels were rented, Bahur looked at Tang Ning and said, "It's a long way to Xiaoan city. I've brought half a month's worth of dry food with me. When I pass through those countries, I'll go into the city to replenish it." Bahur was obviously a qualified guide. In addition to arranging everything, he also thoughtfully prepared a cloak for all of them. The wind and sand in the desert are strong, and the strong wind carries the sand grains. The feeling of blowing on the face is like a knife. This is also the reason why the skin of women in the western regions is generally not very good. Once they relax their protection, their delicate skin will be damaged in a short time. It was eroded by wind and sand over time. Riding camels, walking in the desert, with the scorching sun above their heads. As soon as they left Yangguan, Xiao Xiao and Tang Yao Yao's fresh energy was exhausted. They were listless and said nothing while riding on the camels. Bahur, on the other hand, had been looking around since just now, his expression becoming uneasy. After leaving Yang Pass, he finally couldn't help but catch up with Tang Ning in front of him and asked, "Master, where are your guards?" Tang Ning said, "We don't have any guards. Entering the desert without guards is no different from seeking death. Less than 100 miles west of Yangguan, you will become the soul of a horse thief." Bahur laughed dryly and said, "Sir, stop joking." Tang Ning said seriously, "I'm not joking." Although he didn't bring many people, the overall strength of their team was stronger than any large caravan. "How can this be possible?" Bahur stopped his camel urgently and said in shock, "Without guards, we will die in the desert within 3 days." Seeing that Tang Ning had no intention of changing his mind, he immediately jumped off the camel and said, "No, I won't go this time. I will return the banknotes to you when I go back." Although he liked silver, he cherished his life more. Following this group of old, weak, and sick people without guards into the desert was simply to die. As soon as he finished speaking, dozens of figures suddenly emerged from behind the ruins not far ahead. These people rode horses and quickly rushed to Tang Ning and others. A rough count showed that there were about 30 people. Bahur saw the man in the front sitting on the sand, then bounced up from the ground due to the heat, and said in a trembling voice, "Sand, sand scorpion." Shaxi was riding on the horse, looking at Tang Ning, his face full of ferocity, gritting his teeth and saying, "Boy, I thought you were hiding in the city and not coming out." Tang Ning didn't want to bring guards with him because he didn't want to make a big fuss, otherwise he could bring all the elites of the Beggar sect and the disciples of the 10,000 Gu sect to the western regions. But Bahur's words reminded him that even if he didn't need to rely on them for protection, he had a few people under his command, so he didn't have to do everything himself. Tang Ning glanced at Lao Zheng and said, "Lao Zheng, thank you for your help." Lao Zheng jumped off the camel, and the man felt a flash in front of his eyes, and the whole person was dragged off the horse. Old Zheng pulled out the butcher knife from his waist, put it on the neck of the sand scorpion, and said expressionlessly, "Let them get off the horse. Please spare my life." The ferocious sand scorpion immediately wilted, looked at his men on horseback, and shouted, "What are you still standing there for? Get off the horse." "Wait," another young man on the horse glanced at him and said disdainfully, "Brother, are you scared silly? There are so many of us, are you afraid of these old guys?" The young man looked at old Zheng and said, "Let us go quickly, big brother, otherwise I will chop you all into meat paste in a while." "Asshole," Sand Scorpion felt the butcher knife on his neck was getting hotter, and cursed angrily, saying, "Get off my horse, he will really kill me." The young man smiled and said, "Big brother, if you die, the brothers will avenge you." Shaxi was furious and said, "Asshole, do you think you can be the boss after I die?" As soon as he finished speaking, he found that his men on horseback did not move, and his face immediately turned pale. Old Zheng looked at the two of them with some boredom, grabbed a handful of sand from the ground, and threw it out casually. Ah! My eyes! I can't see. More than 10 people fell off their horses and were knocked unconscious by the back of the knife by old Zheng. When the rest of the people reacted, they opened their eyes and saw yellow sand all over the sky. Bang bang bang. The yellow sand hit the ruffians on horseback, making a series of dull sounds. In a moment, no one could sit on the horse safely. Bahir was stunned to see that the ordinary yellow sand had such great power in the hands of the man. Tang Ning looked at Bahir and asked, "Do you still not want to go now?" Bahir swallowed and asked, "Can I choose?" "Of course, I'm not an unreasonable person." Tang Ning nodded and said, "You can choose to go willingly, or be forced to go. You have a quarter of an hour to think about it." Tang Ning glanced at him and then turned his attention to Shaxi and others again. This chapter is first published on AIU Voice Novel Network. Please remember the website address. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 920. Young Master, spare your life. The man nicknamed Sand Scorpion trembled immediately when he saw Tang Ning looking at him, and said, "Young Master, you are too young to see the mountains. Please let us go." "Let you go?" Tang Ning gave him a cold look and said, "You were not going to let us go just now." Sand Scorpion's heart skipped a beat, and before he could speak again, those who had fallen off their horses and temporarily recovered their sight had already rushed towards the old beggar, Tang Yao Yao, and others. No matter how you look at it, these two pretty girls and the old guys on the horse look much easier to bully than the guy with the butcher knife. As long as they are restrained, even if the big fat sheep cannot be slaughtered today, they can still escape unscathed. Little Bahir's expression changed, and he was about to give a warning when he suddenly saw Sand Scorpion's men falling to the ground one by one as they rushed towards the camel, their faces turned blue, foaming at the mouth, and their bodies still, in unconscious twitching. "Hard. Be careful," came out of his mouth. Looking at the people lying on the hot sand, their bodies twitching, Bahir felt that the sun above his head was not so hot anymore, and a chill rushed from his tailbone to the back of his head. The 6 elders of Wangu sect got off their camels, and centipedes, scorpions, and other poisonous insects quickly crawled out from the bodies of the 30 or so people. They disappeared after crawling to the feet of several elders. Bahir hugged the camel's legs and stared at the scene in a daze, his mind going pale. Until this moment, he didn't know why these people didn't need to bring guards when they came out. The butcher with the butcher's knife could knock down all the Sand Scorpion's men with a handful of sand. Those old men who looked like they had one foot in the coffin could actually command poisonous insects such as centipedes and scorpions to bite people. What the hum are these monsters? When Tang Ning walked towards Sand Scorpion, this well-known bully in Shazhu city had already turned pale and slumped down on the hot sand. He backed away and shouted loudly, "Don't come here, don't come here." The subordinates didn't even touch the corners of those people's clothes, and fell to the ground unconscious one by one. These fat sheep in his eyes have long since turned into Yama who is seeking life. Tang Ning looked at him with a smile on her face and said, "Don't be afraid, how about we discuss something? There is a huge temperature difference between day and night in the desert. During the hottest time during the day, the ground temperature can reach 60 degrees, but at night it can drop below 10 degrees. Therefore, tents and bedding must be prepared." Tang Ning and Tang Yao Yao made a small bonfire and were roasting a leg of lamb. The fat made a sizzling sound as it was roasted by the flames. After the seasonings were sprinkled on it, the aroma spread far away. Sand Scorpion took a few strong breaths of the aroma of roasted lamb legs, took a bite of dry food, kicked one of his men on the butt, and said, "Move quickly, don't you see it's getting dark?" Tang Ning divided the roasted lamb leg between Tang Yao Yao and Xiao Xiao, and then took out another one to roast. Bahir's initial suggestion was correct. It would be beneficial to bring a few escorts with him. At least he wouldn't have to do hard work like setting up a tent himself. The old beggar would not do such a thing. It was a bit inappropriate to let the distinguished elder of Wangu sect set up tents, and it seemed a bit disrespectful to the old man. Old Zheng didn't mind it, and just asked him to set up 10 tents by himself. I'm afraid I'll have to wait until tomorrow. Tang Ning only left 10 of Sand Scorpion's 30 men. Although Tang Ning disdained using poison to control others, they still had their own targets. To deal with these villains, one must fight evil with evil. After experiencing the feeling of dying, Sand Scorpion and their subordinates became more honest and took the initiative to take on the work of exploring the road and setting up tents. The only bad thing is that one more person and one more mouth, but fortunately Bahir originally prepared food and water for a small caravan of dozens of people, which was enough for them to last in the desert for more than a month, and according to Bahir he said that he was very familiar with the locations of the small countries in the desert, which was enough for them to rush to those small countries to replenish food and water before they ran out. Bahir stood behind Sand Scorpion, holding a piece of mutton leg in his hand and chewing on it. The difference between him and Shasya and others is that he is an interpreter, not a slave. People like Shasya can only eat dry food and eat sour and astringent wolf meat, but he is qualified to eat the mutton roasted by Tang Ning himself. Originally, he was thinking of escaping, but after seeing the scene where Sand Scorpion's men were convulsing during the day, he immediately gave up the idea. This group of people were all monsters. Along the way, he found that the old people who looked like they were about to put one foot in the coffin had better physical strength than them. Even he couldn't stand it after a day's journey, but they couldn't stand it. Still in high spirits. What's even more frightening is that these people can also drive poisonous insects in the desert. When they go into the desert on weekdays, they have to be careful of poisonous snakes and scorpions. Since he saw scorpions and poisonous snakes in the desert several times, he also saw those old guys. After wanting to walk around, he deliberately placed the tent around them to avoid being visited by poisonous insects while sleeping at night. The bugs in the desert are very poisonous. If you are bitten by them, your life may be decided here. There is also the butcher who never leaves his body. He is simply a beast. On the first night they set up camp, they encountered a pack of wolves. There were more than a dozen wolves. Even if they encountered a small caravan, they had to be treated with caution, but Bahir, only seeing him rushing into the pack of wolves alone, he raised the knife in his hand like chopping melons and vegetables. In the blink of an eye, he had opened the heads of more than a dozen wolves. Those wolves originally wanted to treat them as food. In the end, it became their food. What Sand Scorpion and others eat these days is wolf leg meat. Sand Scorpion looked at the mutton in Bahir's hand, licked his dry lips, and said, "Brother Ba, give me a bite." Bahir glanced at him and said, "1 tael of silver." Sand Scorpion was furious when he heard this and said, "1 tael of silver can buy a sheep." Bahir rolled his eyes at him and said, "Whether you want to eat or not." Shasya said, "I don't have any money." Bahir's eyes glanced back and forth at a dagger on Sand Scorpion's waist, and said, "I can exchange it for something on your body." Sand Scorpion said angrily, "Don't go too far." Bahir snorted coldly and said, "If you understand your own identity, do you think you are still a Sand Scorpion in Shazhu city?" Shaz Scorpion's chest rose and fell a few times, and finally calmed down. He smiled and said, "Brother Ba, don't be so stingy. If you return to Shazhu in the future, I will protect you." "No need to convert," Bahir snorted coldly. After finishing this job, he no longer had to stay in Shazhu. 1,000 taels of silver was enough for him to live happily in any city in Chen state. Sand Scorpion looked at him, snorted coldly, and said, "This dagger is worth at least 10 taels of silver. If you want to exchange it for mutton, you are dreaming." After a while, Bagler played with the delicate dagger in his hand. When he saw Tang Ning approaching, a smile appeared on his face and asked, "Sir, do you want to see me for anything?" Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Which country do you want to go to tomorrow?" Shanhuan Kingdom, Bagler said with a smile. Shanhuan Kingdom is the smallest country in the western region. Counting the king and ministers, there are only more than 100 people. We can go there tomorrow to replenish some food and water. Tang Ning was a little confused and asked, "Such a small country has not been annexed?" Bagler smiled and said, "You don't know something. Although Shanhuan is small, it is also one of the countries recognized by the countries in the western regions. Except for Zioan, the countries in the western regions generally do not annex each other. Moreover, Shanhuan state is too small and very close to Chen state. Who is willing to annex a country with 100 people? If they are misunderstood by Chen state's army, wouldn't they be in big trouble?" Tang Ning finally understood. To put it bluntly, Shanhuangguo was too weak to be taken seriously by the big countries. Waging a war against them would not be worth the gain. Countries in the western regions are very strange. They only recognize those countries with historical heritage. Otherwise, even the most powerful forces are just horse thieves in their eyes. However, as long as they have historical heritage, a tribe like Shanhuan with only 100 people, can also be called a country. Tang Ning glanced at Bagler with satisfaction. Along the way, because of Bagler's relationship, they didn't encounter a wave of horse thieves. The campsite they found was also in a very suitable location. This 1,000 taels of silver was spent. Not worth. In addition to replenishing food and water in Shanhangakuo tomorrow, they can also take a short rest there. It is not easy to encounter a city in the desert. Tang Yao Yao and Xiao Xiao have been traveling for several days. Although their bodies can still hold on, they feel sad in their hearts. I'm afraid she was already exhausted. Even Tang Ning looked at the endless yellow sand every day and wanted to see something different. Early the next morning, they packed up their tents and set off again. After walking in a certain direction for about an hour, Bagler rode on a camel, pointed to the sand dunes in front of him, and said, "Sir, after climbing over the sand dune, you will see Shanhuan Kingdom in front of you." Tang Ning was about to drive the camel over the sand dunes when she noticed something strange about Lao Zheng. She turned to look at him and asked, "What's wrong?" Lao Zheng rode on the camel, sniffed, looked behind the sand dunes, and said, "There is blood." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 921. Shanhuan was the smallest country in the western region, with a population of less than 100 people and only 50 soldiers capable of fighting. The reason why such a country can exist in the western regions for so many years is that although Shanhuan is a small country, it is still one of the countries recognized by the countries. The countries in the western regions fight against each other. If there are foreign enemies watching, they will form a solid alliance. The horse thieves in the western regions usually rob merchants with great ferocity and would often massacre entire caravans, but they dare not take action against these small countries. It had been half a month since they entered the desert. Tang Ning and his party needed to replenish food and clean water, so they asked Bagler to lead the way to Shanhuan Kingdom. However, after climbing over the sand dunes, the scene in front of them was unexpected by everyone. In front of several buildings standing in the desert, dozens of horse thieves were carrying out a massacre. They were armed with weapons and chased some unarmed civilians, killing and laughing at the same time. Under the feet of Tang Ning and others, many corpses lay scattered in various directions, with broken limbs and broken arms lying on the ground. Tang Yao Yao and Xiao Xiao had never seen such a scene before. They turned away long ago, covered their mouths and retched. Even Sand Scorpion, a famous villain in Shazhu City, had never seen such a scene. He supported the camel and vomited out the mutton he had eaten yesterday. Not far ahead, a man with a spear in his hand saw a horse thief chop down an old man. His eyes were split open. He stepped forward and forced the two horse thieves back. He said angrily, "How dare you attack me, Shan Huan? If you take action, you will definitely face the wrath of the countries in the western regions." Although Shan Huan is only a small country, it is also one of the 36 countries in the western region. If the horse thieves in the desert dare to rob Shan Huan, they will be wiped out from the desert by all the countries. The horse thief laughed twice and said, "Ha ha, they can't care about themselves now, so how can they care about you? Besides, as long as we kill you all, who knows that it was us who destroyed Shan Huan's country?" The man watched his companions fall one by one, with a look of despair on his face. The king and several ministers had already died in the hands of these horse thieves. Is Shan Huan destined to be destroyed today? He knelt on the ground, looked up at the sky, roared, and said with grief and anger, "O God above, save your people." The horse thief laughed loudly, "It is better to beg your God than to beg me more." He raised the long knife still stained with blood in his hand and shouted loudly, "Kill them all, leave no one behind." As he finished speaking, a horse thief ran over, pointed to a sand dune behind, and said, "Master, someone is coming over there. It looks like a passing caravan." "Caravan," a bloodthirsty smile appeared on the leader of the horse thief's face, and he said, "There is no reason not to eat the fat meat that is delivered to your door. Go kill them all and steal the things." There were about 20 people in the caravan that happened to be passing by not far away. Shan Huan's citizens had been killed and there was no way to fight back. The horse thief led more than 30 companions and rushed towards the caravan. When Tang Ning came back to her senses from this hell on earth, dozens of horse thieves were already rushing forward. Seeing these horse thieves actually raising their butcher knives against the old, weak, women and children, an uncontrollable killing intent surged in his heart. "Old Zheng." He whispered something, and Lao Zheng jumped off the camel and walked slowly forward. Sand Scorpion and Bagler saw this scene. Although they knew that the butcher was very brave, they were facing 30 of the most ferocious horse thieves in the desert. They still felt a little unsure. However, when they looked back at the old guys still riding horses, their hearts quickly calmed down. Even the most poisonous scorpions and snakes in the desert have to obey them. These dozens of horse thieves are not enough in their eyes. When more than 30 horse thieves rushed over with a roar, they saw that the other party did not run away. Not only that, there was also a man walking towards them. The man looked at them from a distance and said loudly, "Wait a minute." A horse thief who knew Chinese laughed wildly and said, "What are you waiting for? If you have anything to say, please leave it to your next life." As soon as he finished speaking, the weapons in the hands of several horse thieves had already dropped, and they seemed to be cutting the man into pieces as if they were going forward. Lao Zheng stopped, touched the butcher knife at his waist with one hand, and said calmly, "As you wish." Sand Scorpion and Bagler watched with fear as the butcher walked up alone. The next moment, a certain scene in their memories reappeared again. The difference is that the last time he killed was a wolf, this time it was a human. Vomit. The first person who couldn't stand the stimulation was Bagler. He sat down on the sand, not caring that the sand had already been burned hot by the sun. He covered his chest and kept retching. Sand Scorpion didn't want to vomit at first, because he had closed his eyes, but it seemed that he was infected by Bagler. Hearing the sound of his vomiting, his stomach was filled with turmoil, and the next moment he joined Bagler. Of ranks, Tang Yao Yao and Xiao Xiao had already run behind the sand dune, while Bagler, Sand Scorpion, and his men were vomiting. The old beggar glanced in front of him in disgust and closed his eyes. The elders of Wangu sect raised their heads and glanced with unnatural expressions on their faces. Lao Zheng went on a killing spree among the horse thieves, and the horse thieves who were behind the killing finally realized something was wrong, abandoned the pursuit of the unarmed Shan Huan citizens, and rushed towards this side. The few people left in Shenhuan were less stressed and looked over with blank eyes. There were 70 or 80 horse thieves in this group. Half of them were killed by Lao Zheng like cutting melons and vegetables, and there were more than 40 people left. When they rushed to a place several feet away from Lao Zheng, they suddenly stopped and looked at him with pale faces, not daring to take another step forward. They killed the people of Shenhuan happily, but when they saw this piece of hell on earth composed of their own corpses, they couldn't help but feel cold from the bottom of their hearts. At this moment, the figure holding the butcher knife and standing in the sea of corpses and blood looked like a killing god in their eyes. The leader of the horse thieves shook his tongue, and the slight pain dispelled the fear in his heart. He looked at the figure in front of him and gritted his teeth and said, "Let's go together, kill him for me." Seeing this, the two elders of the Wangu sect jumped off the camel. Lao Zheng looked back at them and said, "I will do it myself." The two trembled, but finally did not take a step forward. On the camel, the old beggar opened his tightly closed eyes, looked at Lao Zheng with a surprised look, and murmured, "He actually took this road." Tang Ning looked at Lao Zheng, who was fighting in the group of horse thieves. At this moment, he realized that he didn't know Lao Zheng at all. Usually, he was stupid and looked very honest, but at this moment, he was like a butcher. It seemed that he had a bloodthirsty gene in his bones, which was suppressed hard on weekdays, and only at this time would it burst out completely. Bahar and Sand Scorpion were so scared that they even forgot to vomit. They stared at the front with a dull look, and there was even a wet mark on the sand under them. The horse thieves also trembled with their legs and were extremely frightened. Their companions fell one by one, but the terrifying butcher seemed to be tireless and was still raising his hands and slashing. Every knife he swung seemed to be impossible to avoid. They could only watch as it chopped down on their heads and harvested lives one by one. More than a dozen people fell in a pool of blood, and the sand under their feet had also been dyed red. "Ah! Spare me! Don't kill me, don't kill me! I don't know who was the first to lose his weapon." The bandits no longer had the will to face the devil. They were completely mentally broken, and they dropped their weapons and fled in all directions. However, they just ran a few steps and fell to the ground one by one, twitching all over. In a short period of time, none of the dozens of fierce and murderous bandits were left standing. In the distance, dozens of the remaining Shanhung people slowly walked over. Some of them were still bleeding and limping, but they still supported each other and moved towards the side. At a certain moment, they knelt down in front of Tang Ning and others.